Sure. My name's Jason Smith. While I was at Williams, it was Jake. Do you want to start over?
We can wait a second.
Yeah. She's just saying hi because Michael's getting. My name is Jason Smith. I was class of 91. While I was at Williams, it was Jake, but now it's Jason. I prefer him, his, and he. And we're in Littleton, Colorado, outside Denver. Well, it's interesting you ask that now because we just moved into this house a year and a half ago, right as the pandemic started. And prior to that, I had lived in a rural town when I was growing up, and then I was in a city all of my adult life. So this is the first time that we've lived in suburbia. So perhaps not surprisingly, my hobbies these days are very suburban hobbies. Gardening. I'm suddenly a gardener, which I never thought I'd be a gardener. And bird watching. I suddenly have a bunch of bird feeders, and I stand there at that window and watch, and I have my little book that tells me what kind of bird I'm looking at. So for the first time in a long time, I have genuine hobbies. Here in Denver, I am a adoptions counselor at one of the local shelters. The shelter's called the Denver Dumb Friends League. That's dumb as in can't hear or talk. The sort of old-timey notion of Helen Keller, deaf and dumb. And the name comes from London, where there was a Dumb Friends Society in the 19th century, and it was one of the first animal shelters for lost cats and dogs. And so in 1910, Denver opened its own privately funded animal shelter and called it the Denver Dumb Friends League. And there, my job is to find home for the dogs and cats and small animals when patrons come in and are looking. That's what I do.
How did you get involved in that work?
So a very circuitous route. I'll go back a few years. Leaving Williams in 91, I sort of went the conventional route. At the time, I joke that you either were going to become an investment banker or a management consultant, or you hadn't amounted to anything. And I definitely fell for that and went into management consulting for about 5 years. And I was in DC at the time and decided that my route was going to be public affairs, communications, advocacy. And so for more than 20 years, I worked for a firm in DC and focused on advocacy around K-12 education. And it was a very, very fulfilling job. I really felt like through that work, I was making a difference in a public policy area and enjoyed it a lot. But I did not want to reach the age of retirement having always been in client services. I just knew there was more out there than waking up every morning worrying about whether or not my clients were happy. And so I had the opportunity to leave there in 2017, and I took a year off and did nothing professionally except look for my next direction. And I knew that animals might be an area I wanted to explore. I grew up on a farm. I've had animals in my life most of my life, and feel very passionate about making sure animals are well cared for. And so I started, this is still all in DC, and I started volunteering at the local animal shelter. For a time I thought I might want to go into service dog training, explore what it would be like to work with service dogs. So I volunteered at a service dog training organization out there, and loved what I was doing, loved the direction I seemed to be going. It felt like the arrows were pointing in that direction, but I knew we weren't going to be doing that in Washington. There was no way to live in a townhouse in downtown Washington, D.C., working for an animal shelter. And so we decided we would move to a different part of the country, and we put a map up on the wall. We literally put a map on the wall and started exploring options. I'm a pretty analytical person, so I came up with my matrix of factors that we were going to weigh in. Things like climate, political climate, obviously cost of living, cost of housing, those sorts of things. And it came down to Portland, Oregon, and Denver, Colorado. And we basically flipped a coin, and Denver won. And so we focused our efforts on finding a job in Denver, Colorado. And that led to an opportunity at a service dog training organization. And after being there a year, I realized that while I love the animal care part of that job, there was something pulling me in a different direction, and it was the world of shelter animals. And so I had the opportunity to become an adoptions counselor at the Dumb Friends League a year ago, and I feel really, really fulfilled. I love what I do on a daily basis.
That's wonderful to hear, and thank you for sharing your whole journey. I mean, a lot of the stories that we're trying to tell here are those kind of circuitous routes where people end up in something completely different that they weren't expecting, and that's really powerful work. And now you have really cute clients that you get to make sure that they get taken care of. So that's
it's
really
easier to
fun.
please these clients.
Oh, for sure.
We're still figuring that out, to be honest. We've only been in Denver 2.5 years, and more than a year of that was pandemic. We moved into this house in February of 2020, a month before the shutdown. And so we joke with our neighbors that a lot of them we haven't met yet or haven't really gotten to know because we got here and then everyone had to lock their doors. So to be honest, engaging with community, at least neighborhood community, is something we still look forward to doing. Engaging in the animal welfare community is maybe another take on that, and that's mostly via social media. I'm pretty passionate about animal welfare and animal rights, and so I participate in a lot of online discussion groups talking about those issues. We really seem to be turning a corner when it comes to understanding the animals are sentient beings. They can think, they have feelings, they experience distress, they experience joy, whether we're talking about pets or whether we're talking about animals that have traditionally been viewed simply for food. And so I'm passionate about advocating on behalf of those issues and staying in contact with the folks who are really leading the charge. So I guess in the absence of face-to-face engagement that the pandemic has really prevented us from doing, the online community of animal welfare advocates has been a suitable alternative. It's a great question. It's an interesting question for me to think about because I was born and raised in a small town in Nebraska, and my path to Williams was not the stereotypical path of, and I know I'm being stereotypical here, but particularly 30 years ago, upper middle class, white kids going to highly selective private institutions, mostly on the coast, and then getting accepted to places like Williams along with a bunch of other classmates. That was sort of the stereotypical view I had of an entering Williams first year. And that was not my story. My story was I came from a state that did not send a lot of people to places like Williams. I did go to a private school, but most of my classmates did not leave the state to go to college. And so I was definitely, I had a feeling of isolation or aloneness when I got there. I literally was the only person from the state, and I felt very unprepared academically and sort of world experience wise. Most of my friends had done things and seen things and been academically challenged in a way that I had not been. So my reaction to that was to work really hard to catch up and to try to be a part of. And that meant going the very, very conventional route. So earlier I joked that it felt at times like if you wanted to be a successful graduate at Williams, you needed to become either an investment banker or a management consultant. And in hindsight, I can joke about that and be a little sarcastic about it. But at the time, I fully embraced that. I really did believe that these were my two paths. These were my two options. And I didn't want to become an investment banker, mainly because I had heard that they had to pull all-nighters all the time, and that sounded awful. And so I went the management consulting route. And it was very important to me at the time, because of my Williams experience, to feel like I had arrived at that milestone of getting a job as a management consultant before I graduated. That was a very important part of it. You had to have the job locked down before you graduated, and it worked out. And so I did feel a part of. All right, fast forward. I do all those things that I talked about before, pretty conventional professional path. Now I'm at a point down the road 30 years later where I don't want to do that anymore. And I think in some ways that Williams experience and keeping up with my classmates through social media, through the alumni magazine, through whatever means, exposed me to the fact that not everybody in fact had done that. That there were folks who, by dint of courage or financial freedom or some other means, had picked very, very unconventional paths. And so while I had to do a lot of soul searching to get comfortable with the idea that I was going to be an hourly wage employee who would never be bragging about my income again, I knew as a Williams grad that I didn't have anything more to prove to anybody, and that I did have the freedom to take this pretty unconventional path in animal welfare and shelter life.
Thank you for all of that. I do think that narrative of like wanting to fit in and occupying that space is one that, as a fairly recent alum, is still there, and is definitely a theme that sharing these stories about people who've taken these other ways, these other paths, is really powerful and meaningful. So hearing your story, I think, is very encouraging for folks to think about how they can find their joys and sort of let go of that I need to fit a specific archetype from Williams. And so that's really meaningful, and your work sounds like so much more fun than investment or consulting.
It is, but you know, I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that you can leave Williams, become an adoptions counselor, and be able to pay the rent. I mean, I'm working with kids in their 20s who are really struggling. They love this work. They came to it a lot earlier than I did. They understood their passion for shelter life a lot earlier than I did. And the decisions and choices they have to make in order to make ends meet are really, really tough. And I don't want to do a diatribe on income inequality, but I admire them because they're making sacrifices to do that work that I don't have to make, because I did do something else. I did take the more conventional route for 30 years, and that afforded me the opportunity to move to Denver, to buy a fixer-upper house and remodel it, and now just live this very, very comfortable life while doing this hard and low-paying work. That's not a combination that everybody has the privilege to put together for themselves. So my job is to welcome a patron, that's what we call the customers who come into the building, welcome them in and start a conversation with them about what they're looking for, what their life looks like now, so that I can be thinking about the animals we have available and make a match. It's really a matchmaking exercise, and it takes time. The typical person is who ends up adopting is in there for a couple hours because they're getting to know their animal. There's a lot of animals for them to hear about before they make the choice. So there's a real investment on their part, and I spend a lot of time with these folks, and I sort of get to know them, at least as well as you can get to know someone spending a couple hours talking to them. When it works and they walk out the door with an animal, especially a dog, because my passion is dogs, and it's an animal that may have been there a while or maybe has a pretty difficult past, either behaviorally or maybe it was neglected or something else that made that dog's previous life not so great. I'm gonna choke up. To watch that person get so excited about this new dog and walk out that door just as happy as could be, and knowing that that dog's life changed just like that totally transformed, just makes my heart explode every time.
That's a really beautiful moment to experience, because there's so many very deep, like you have a lot of deep passionate ties with all of those aspects, from the people coming in to the animals that are going out, and that matchmaking is a really wonderful thing to get to experience. And we've gotten to know people in a very short amount of time, and it is a truly wonderful experience to tie those lines and bring people and these animals together. And so that I can only imagine that moment has such a really nice high to it, in the sense that it's truly beautiful. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. A lot of our patrons, I give them my email address and I beg them to send us photographs of the animals in their new homes, because not just me, but the rest of the adoption counselors, we see those pictures of the animals either having the time of their life in the backyard running around, or deeply relaxed on a bed or a sofa, just sleeping so deeply, which is not something that it's easy to do in the shelter where there's always noise. Either one of those things, the joy and fun or the deep relaxation, just brings me so much joy. So I mentioned that I was raised in Nebraska, and knew I was going to college, but I wasn't in a community that was fully aware of all of the options. And one of my family's best friends was a guy named Noyce Rogers, who is class of 61, and he was born and raised in the same town I was. And he watched my progress from a very early age and made it a point to communicate to me that there was this place called Williams on the East Coast that had changed his life. And he still had friends that he had made at Williams. He went back for reunions. It really was a very important part of his life and his identity. And when it came time to start thinking about colleges, he made himself available in a significant way to help me get there. When I was a junior, he made arrangements for me to fly to New York and then drive up with him to Williams to have an interview. And he wrote a letter of recommendation for me that was so powerful. And long story short, I got in. And my experience at Williams was equally transformative. It really did change my own trajectory, and I'm so grateful that he was there to introduce the idea of Williams to this kid who would not have had exposure to it in any other way. So my thank you would be to Noyce Rogers, class of 61, for giving me the gift of a Williams education.
Thank you for that. Those ties back to Williams are really wonderful to hear about, and I'm glad Noyce was there to introduce you. So that brings us to the end of our Ephs on the Move interview. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with anyone who comes across this?
If you had told me just a couple years before all of these changes took place, that this was going to happen to me. That I would wake up one day in suburban Denver, working in animal welfare, and tending to a garden. I never would have believed you. I absolutely would have looked you in the eye and said, that's not me. You clearly don't know who I am. And not who I am, but just you don't know what makes me tick. I'm an urban guy. I like urban living. I like the fast-paced, high stress, high adrenaline world of public affairs and communications. This is my life. And through a series of events, some of my own doing, some of not my own doing, this is where I landed. And I think it's a testament to the fact that we don't know what we don't know. And that if I keep a positive, optimistic outlook toward what comes next, and an open-mindedness about what it might look like, your life can change dramatically for the better.